Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of the newspaper analysis from the civil service examinations perspective. So, today we are going to discuss the Hindu Delhi edition dated 1st August 2023. The important topics which are to be discussed have been displayed on the screen, and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below. So, now let us begin our today's session. This topic has appeared at page, text, and the context. And this topic reads the hybrid EV imperative. So that is very clear from the topic headline that this article is basically dealing with the electric vehicles, the challenges, the solutions, the present status, and the associated dimensions. As far as the UPSC scheme of syllabus is concerned, this topic has an intersection of science and tech as well as environment, and both lying in General Studies Mains Paper 3. Also, it can be associated with the dimension of General Studies Mains Paper 1 in the industrial locational factors in the subject of geography. However, in today's session, we will be dealing it mainly from the science and tech and the environment perspective. So in today's session, we are going to discuss that what are various types of electric vehicles, what are the challenges with the adoption of electric vehicles, and what can be a way ahead in order to promote this electric vehicle industries or electric vehicle as such in India. So before coming to this, we all know that there has been a recent push in the electric vehicles manufacturing as well as adoption. The reason is we all know that the fossil fuel based vehicles emit lot of greenhouse gases, which in turn is the major reason behind the global warming as well as the climate change. And also recently many countries have come forward with their net zero emission targets. So electric vehicles are also being seen as an important tool to achieve this net zero emission, to green our cities, to clean our mobility, and in overall to fight the global warming and climate change. In this context, first we should understand that what is a basic concept of net zero for a vehicle. So first is that what do we mean by net zero? It is basically whatever the release of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is because of the human activities, that must be sequestered back so that the net release of the CO2 due to humans is zero. This is the net zero emission. In the context of a vehicle, let us see that what do we mean by net zero. Now this definition is very important. The net zero for a vehicle includes the emissions at both the tailpipe of the vehicle, that means the emissions which a vehicle is releasing into the atmosphere, as well as the emissions at the power plant which is going on there to manufacture that vehicle. So these two components are very important. One is the emission at the tailpipe, other is at the power plant. Making the vehicles net zero requires the cutting the emissions from both the new as well as the existing vehicles. Okay, so keeping this thing in mind, we shall carry forward our discussion. This point is very important. We will discuss the importance of this point in the challenges and the way ahead part. But first, let us see that what are various types of electric vehicles. So primarily there are four types of electric vehicles. One is the hybrid vehicle. Second is the complete or the full electric vehicles. Third is the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and fourth is the fuel cell electric vehicles. Basically, what do we understand by the electric vehicles? That the engine of these vehicles is deriving its energy from the electricity, right? Now, how this electricity is being produced differs in all these type of electric vehicles. For example, when it comes to the hybrid type of electric vehicle, this electricity is produced by the ICE, which stands for the internal combustion engine, right? So here there is a electricity driven vehicle, but who is producing that electricity is the internal combustion engine. These electric vehicles have typically small batteries having the storage capacity of around 1 to 5 kilowatt hour. They basically act as the buffer. There is no charging from the grid, which means that these small batteries cannot be charged from the grid. So these are the important components of the hybrid vehicle. Comparing this to the other extreme, that is the complete or the full electric vehicle, here there is no internal combustion engine. All the electricity is coming from the battery. That is why these batteries have to be very large. Their power range around 20 to 120 kilowatt hour. Now just see the difference. Because here the electricity was being produced by the ICE, therefore a very small battery was required. But here there is no ICE and electricity is produced by this battery. That is why it needs to be a storage battery. It cannot be just a buffer. It will be the primary material to supply the electricity, and hence a large battery is required. And because the battery is very large, it can only be charged from the grid. Here there was no charging from the grid, one extreme. Here there is another extreme, it can only be charged from the grid. Third one are the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. They have the storage of battery around 5 to 15 kilowatt hour, that is more than this one but less than this one. And they can also be charged from grid because their storage is slightly on a higher side, right? So we can say that plug-in hybrid vehicles are basically the full electric vehicles when they are running on battery because they can be charged on grid. So that is why plug-in hybrid vehicles is basically a mixture of hybrid as well as the full electric vehicles, right? These full electric vehicles are also known as plug-in EVs. So here, because the name is plug-in hybrid, hence the mixture of both the components. Last one is the fuel cell electric vehicles. Here the electricity is produced by the fuel cell, and again here also a small battery is used which basically is aimed at providing the buffer, and therefore it stores a very less amount of energy, right? So four types: hybrid, complete, complete hybrid, and fuel cell EV. So these are four types of electric vehicles. So if you have understood the basics, the science of these electric vehicles, that what are various types, now we shall be moving towards the challenges as well as the way ahead part. First, we shall discuss the challenge. The first and the foremost challenge is the availability of the charging infrastructure. Countries like India and other developing as well as the LDCs countries, they lack in charging infrastructure. We are all aware about the biggest challenge of the electric vehicles is that in one charge these vehicles can move only up to few hundred kilometers, that is around 300 kilometers. Now because the consumer behavior is such that, especially in the developing countries like India, that they have only one vehicle which they use for the short distances as well as for the long distances. So in developing countries where the per capita income is slightly on the lower side, there people cannot afford to have two vehicles, that is one for short distance and one for long, and hence they have one vehicle. So that is why on the long trips, because the range is restricted for the EVs, they would be requiring continuous support of the charging infrastructure so that they can charge their vehicles, right? But in developing countries, we do not have this charging infrastructure, right? Second is the cost and capital. Now, investment in these electric vehicles is very huge in terms of research and development, in terms of mining lithium, in terms of grid connection. Also, we know that on an average, the electric vehicles cost more than the traditional vehicles. In order to set up the electric vehicle industry, a huge amount of capital is required because it will be based on lot of automation, lot of raw material, lot of forward and backward linkages. That is why cost and capital shoots up for the electric vehicles. The third challenge is related to the grid connection. Again, as we discussed about the full electric vehicles which can only be charged from the grid, the challenge in the developing country is that this grid connection is not available in every region. For example, there can be regions having very rugged terrain, topography, the tribal areas, the desert areas, okay, certain remote locations where still the grid connection is not available. So how can we go for the full electric vehicle which is only dependent on the grid connectivity? Only they can be charged from the grid, right? So this is a challenge. Next is the rupee depreciation. For example, in India, we know that rupee has depreciated to a huge extent. If the rupee is depreciating, then if we want to import the batteries, so the cost of this import is also going to rise, right? So battery import, similarly, if we have to import lithium as a raw material or semiconductors which will be used in them, again it will be dependent on import, rupee depreciation issue. Then comes the raw material, because such type of raw materials like lithium, other rare earth metals, all the critical minerals are mainly stored in few countries. For example, China, Australia, South American countries like Bolivia, Chile, Argentina. Similarly, few are also found in Canada as well as US. So the thing is that because this raw material is so unevenly distributed, that it poses a huge challenge for rest of the world. Then specifically to India, the policy imperatives, there are very high GST rates on the electric vehicles. So all these challenges make the adoption of electric vehicles very difficult in India. In this relation, now we shall look at the way ahead, that what steps can be taken. One is establishing the industries. For this, there should be ease of doing business. There should be adequate incentives to the industrialists so that they come to India and establish their industries. The second important component here from General Studies Mains Paper 1, that is location of industries, it says that we need to identify most promising regions to establish these industries. For example, when we go to the rural areas, the type of electrification of the vehicles must be required in tractors, harvesters, combiners, threshers, etc. On the contrary, when we come to the urban regions, then the electrification of vehicles must be in cars, buses, scooters, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, etc. Right? Also, these industries can be developed on the west coast and east coast, that is the coastal cities, because these coastal regions will be importing the raw material from other countries, and hence it will be more profitable to establish the industries in coastal areas. So the point is that we must take certain policy directions to establish the electric vehicle industries in India, right? Second is in relation to various other policy initiatives. For example, the government can combine the FAME, which is dedicated towards the electric vehicles, as well as the AIM, which stands for Atal Innovation Mission, that is innovation. And that is why this point can be closely associated with the research and development, because government should increase the investment in research and development. India still spends less than 1% in its research and development. So this is a huge issue. Similarly, government must promote and strengthen the IPR protection regime, because this is a new sunrise industry. A lot of innovation, research and development is going on. In order to incentivize the innovative minds in our country, IPR protection regime must be very strong. Similarly, the subsidies can be provided to the end consumers on the electric vehicles cars in order to balance the extra cost which the consumer has to pay vis-a-vis the traditional vehicles. Similarly, production linked incentives scheme can be provided to the industrialists. The basic thing is that whenever we have to boost any industry, there should be incentives given to all the stakeholders in different manner. Only then we can have a kickstart. Similarly, there should be mining reforms, more privatization can be there, transparent auctioning, as well as accountability mechanisms. For all these mining operations, there should be a very good center-state relations. Next, India must focus towards the international cooperation, which it can do from two aspects. One is the bilateral one, and other are the regional cooperations. So it must have a very good relations with the countries who are having the raw material reserves with them. And last is the awareness. There should be a sensitization drive of the consumers so that they become aware about the challenges like climate change and how buying the electric vehicles in the long run can balance that extra cost which they need to provide initially while buying the EVs, right? So all these steps can be written in your answer as the way ahead to promote the electric vehicle industry. So let us revise this topic in brief once again. The topic has appeared at text and the context page in today's The Hindu Daily edition. After that, we learned that what do we mean by the net zero emission for a vehicle, how, which are those two components which should be taken care of. Then we learned the types of electric vehicles, that is the hybrid, full EV, plug-in hybrid, and the fuel cell EV. In the last, we discussed challenges in the context of lack of charging infrastructure, huge cost and capital involved, lack of grid connection, rupee depreciation, unevenly distributed raw materials, and high GST rates. Towards the end, we discussed what can be a way ahead to overcome these challenges in terms of establishing the industries and inviting the industrialists, various policy initiatives in the areas of IPR, subsidy, PLIs, etc., increasing research and development, mining reforms, basically focusing on the center state coordination, similarly, cooperation at bilateral as well as regional level in the sphere of international politics, and last but not the least, the awareness and sensitization of the end consumers. So, this was all about the electric vehicles from today's article. This topic has appeared at page number 12. The topic reads El Nino effects will suppress the rainfall in the second half of the monsoon, says IMD. So, as it is very clear from the headline that this topic is mainly relevant from General Studies Mains Paper 1 section in the component of Geography. Also, from the prelims examinations perspective, such concepts like El Nino, La Nina, IOD are very important. The immediate context of this very news article is that after the torrential rains means very high intensity rainfalls. So it says that after the torrential rain in July and August, usually the second rainiest of the 4 month season, that is of monsoon, that is June, July, August and September, is likely to see below normal rainfall. This has been said by IMD, and the reason given is the prevalence of the El Nino in the Pacific Ocean. So in this context, we will see that what is the phenomena of El Nino and La Nina. For example, in UPSC 2017, the question was asked with reference to the Indian Ocean Dipole. The question said that with reference to the IOD, sometimes mentioned in the news, while forecasting the Indian monsoon, which of the following statements are correct? The statement 1 is IOD phenomena is characterized by a difference in sea surface temperature between tropical Western Indian Ocean and tropical Eastern Pacific Ocean. Statement 2 says that an IOD phenomena can influence an El Nino's impact on the monsoon. So here are the options given to you: 1 only, 2 only, both 1 and 2, or neither 1 or 2. Now, as far as the answer of this particular question is concerned, the statement 1 is incorrect because IOD phenomena is not in relation to the Indian and Pacific Ocean. Rather, it is an intra-ocean phenomena between the West Indian Ocean and East Indian Ocean. So that is why statement 1 is incorrect and statement 2 is correct. That is why 2 only is the correct answer. However, in this very similar scenario, the question can also be asked over the phenomena of El Nino. And that is why it becomes very important that we must know that how El Nino is formed. Now, as far as the IOD, El Nino, La Nina, all these things are concerned, all these things are interaction between the atmosphere as well as oceans. There are certain changes, certain reversals in terms of temperature, pressure, etc., because of which the behavior of the atmospheric winds as well as oceanic currents change. And these changes have a wide-ranging climatic as well as weather impacts across the globe. So now let us understand that what is El Nino. But before understanding El Nino, First, we should look at what is the normal situation in the Pacific Ocean. Now let us observe this particular area in great detail. Clear? I will explain you several concepts in this, because once you go through and understand all these basic concepts, only then you will be able to understand the phenomena of El Nino. So first of all, there are several ocean currents. What is ocean currents? In layman language, ocean currents are like rivers flowing in the oceans. It is found in the oceans that there is a specific mass and volume of water which takes a particular direction, and it has a speed greater than the surroundings. So therefore, just imagine the river flowing in the oceans. Those are the ocean currents. Now ocean currents can be cold currents as well as warm currents depending upon the temperature. Correct? So what happens is that on the western coast of the South America, we have a cold current, and that is why the border of the coast of Peru is cold in nature. Clear? Now the second important concept which you must understand is the primary circulations. Now primary circulations are the primary winds. For example, tropical easterlies, subtropical westerlies are present across the globe. So in the tropical region, the winds which flow in this particular region are tropical easterlies, and that is why they flow in this particular direction in the northern hemisphere and in this particular direction in the southern hemisphere. Now because the wind is flowing from east towards west, it will push the water, and the water in the Pacific Ocean will take the direction from east towards west. Correct? Because the winds are moving from east towards west, and under the influence of these winds, the water of the ocean will also move in the same direction. Now we know that this particular region is warm, and the winds are driving the warm water from the eastern Pacific towards the western Pacific, which will collect the warm water over this particular area. And now because the water over here is warm, this water will start evaporating. Moreover, these winds have redistributed the heat also. They have taken the warm heat from this particular region and they have transported the heat to this region. So that means that the atmosphere near the coast of Australia has become warmer. And we know that the warmer air is lighter in nature, and that is why this region becomes the low pressure area from where the wind rises upwards. This uprising wind evaporates the moisture which is excessively present over this area because the ocean water was moving towards this direction, and there is a formation of clouds in this particular region, and hence the rainfall occurs over this region. And because here we were having the cold conditions, therefore it becomes relatively higher pressure region. And again, as we know that winds move from high pressure to low pressure, that is why the winds are moving from eastern Pacific towards the western Pacific. So this is presently the normal situation. And now you come to the Indian Ocean part. Now during monsoon, we know that land becomes excessively heated compared to the oceans. And now because the land is more heated, the low pressure region develops over the Indian landmass. In comparison to this, the oceans are relatively colder, and that is why here high pressure develops near the coast of Africa, and that is why the winds move from high pressure to low pressure region. These winds are responsible for bringing the moisture of the Arabian Sea as well as Bay of Bengal to the Indian landmass, and hence during the monsoonal season we get rainfall. Now what happens during El Nino is that these pressure conditions gets reversed. In the normal situation, as we have seen that the Pacific region, this particular region was having the high pressure region. But during El Nino, the water of the Peruvian coast becomes warmer. And now because the water has become warmer, so here the low pressure region will get developed. And because now here the low pressure region is developed, the winds which were earlier moving in this particular direction, the speed of these winds will weaken, and that is why it is said that the tropical easterlies get weakened. Now, because the easterly winds are weaker during El Nino, it will not be able to transport this amount of water near to the Australian coast as it was doing before. And therefore, all the warm water will not reach up to the Australian coast, rather, it will be accumulated over this particular region. And hence, now this Pacific region, which earlier was the high pressure area, now becomes the low pressure area. Correct? Now, if this region becomes the low pressure area, let us now see that how the winds will change in Indian Ocean. Earlier, the winds from this high pressure region was going towards the Indian landmass because it was having only one low pressure destination. But now the winds will be divided towards India also as well as towards Pacific also. So now the winds have bifurcated in two parts, and that is why the winds reaching to India will decrease. And if the winds reaching towards India will decrease, hence there will be the situation of droughts. Clear? Now let us see what will happen in Australia. Earlier, Australia was having the low pressure region because the warm water was collected over here and the warm winds were also over here. But now, because the warm water is in central and eastern Pacific or the coast of Australia, we will be having high pressure region, and Australian coast will also face droughts. So what has happened is that the cold water which was earlier present off the coast of Peru has now become warm. And this warming of the oceanic water near the coast of Peru is known as El Nino. So I hope that El Nino phenomena, the conceptual part, is clear to you. So now let us look at some of the probable impacts. The first point is clear, as we have discussed it already, that the drought situations will prevail in India and Australia. Second, there might be floods in the Peru because now we have discussed that of the coast of Peru, the conditions are warmer. And if the conditions are warmer, that means there will be excessive evaporation as well as the cloud formation will take place over this region. The third is the disruption in the oceanic currents. Now, because the winds patterns have reduced their intensity and the pressure conditions have changed in the Pacific Ocean, it will disrupt the oceanic currents. Their velocity, their direction, their discharge will get disrupted. The fourth major impact might be economic in nature, that is the loss to fishing industry. Now let us understand this particular point. Now what happens is that fishing industry, for fishes to flourish over a certain region, they require the continuous supply of nutrients. During the normal condition, when the water was moving in this particular direction, and here we were having the cold conditions, here the upwelling of water was taking place because the water was being transported from east towards west. This void which was created over here was filled by the water which was coming from submarine area, and this was the upwelling of water. The cold water which comes from below the oceanic surface has nutrients with them. But in El Nino situation, these conditions have reversed. Now there is no upwelling in this particular area, rather we have downwelling, and hence these areas are not receiving the adequate nutrients. And therefore there will be the mass death of fishes, and in turn it will lead to huge losses in the fishing industry. And the fifth point is that the heat and the nutrient transfer will also be affected. The effect of El Nino on nutrient transfer we have discussed already, and the heat transfer is self-explanatory because now the winds will not be able to transport the excessive heat from this to this particular region, and that is why the heat transfer will be affected. So I hope the conceptual part of the El Nino, oceanic currents, primary circulations, as well as the multifold effects of the El Nino are clear to you. And now we will talk about the phenomena of La Nina. La Nina is the atmo-oceanic interactions which take place in the Pacific Ocean because of several intervening factors. During the La Nina conditions, the waters of the Western Pacific Oceans are warmer than normal, and of the Eastern Pacific Ocean becomes cooler than normal. Further, in this particular region, there are very strong presence of trade winds also, and these trade winds are northeasterly as well as southeasterly in direction, which derives the water from the eastern Pacific Ocean towards the western Pacific Ocean. Now, because of the presence of warmer than normal situations on the coast of Australia, there exists the region of low pressure and here exists the region of high pressure. From this low pressure region, the winds get uplifted, and in this area, the winds get subsided, and that is why the wind movement takes place in this particular direction. So, whenever there is a condition of La Nina and the low pressure situations over the Western Pacific Ocean, it is generally experienced that India receives higher rainfall. So, this is basically the La Nina situation. This topic has appeared at page number 6 in the article section. The topic reads Recalibrating India's Clean Cooking Strategy. So, as the headline is very clear that it is related to the clean cooking strategy, and therefore, when it comes to the syllabus perspective, this topic finds its relevance in General Studies Mains Paper 2 in the section of Social Justice. The reason is that clean cooking strategy, specifically in the context of India, targets one of the most important vulnerable sections, that is women. So, in this very relation, we shall be discussing certain key facts as well as important arguments which are listed in this article. First of all, it says that in the recent past, the share of the Indian households using the LPG as the primary cooking fuel has risen to 71% in 2020. Now, this is a very positive data for India. In 2011, only 33% of the Indian households were using LPG as the primary cooking. From this 33%, there is almost more than double to 71% in 2020. Even if you see this particular data or the particular column, it says that in 2016 to 17, the cumulative increase in the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwal Yojana, which was basically the gas cylinder connections, was 2 crore. It then increased to 3.5 crore, 7.188, and then 9 crore. In every year, there has been a cumulative increase in the PMUY connection. But the second data is more important. Despite the fact that the connections are increasing, the LPG refill rates has reduced in the 21 to 22 year. If you see that financial year 2016 to 17 up to 2020 to 2021, there was a continuous increase, but in the next financial year, there was a decrease. From 35.2 CR, there was a decrease to 31.3 CR. And that is why average refill per beneficiary was also low in these 2 years, right? So the question is that why, despite these connections are having the higher rates, there is a reduced refill tendency. Even the data suggests that the average refill rates for active non-PMUY consumers are in slow decline. 40% of the PMUY consumers choose to get 2 or fewer refills in a year now. Now this becomes a problematic part. In this very line, we shall discuss that what are the key associated challenges. The first and the foremost challenge is high prices making the refills unaffordable. The reason is that the LPG refill in the year of 2014 was priced at rupees 410, which has increased almost 3 times to rupees 1000, more than rupees 1000. In few areas it is also up to rupees 1100. So it is almost 3 times the price of 2014. And this rise in prices is the biggest hindrance which do not allow the rural people to make their LPG cylinders regularly refilled. Second is the high transportation costs. So in the rural areas, the distributors are very far away. Therefore, this high transportation cost further adds up to the total cost. Unlike the urban areas where the gas cylinders are delivered to the doorsteps, there are many rural areas whereby people have to go to the distributors and then take the cylinders, because of which there is an addition of the cost which the consumer has to pay. The third issue is the lack of awareness about the benefits of LPG. Still driven by the traditional behavioral pattern, many of the women as well as elderly are not coming out of their comfort zone. They are still relying on the traditional sources like woods, kerosene, etc. They are not knowing the health benefits of the LPG. There have been instances where the elder women of the households are not even aware that how to use these cylinders. So because of this low awareness, there is a low refill ratio. The fourth is the insufficient decision making power of the women. Now, the women empowerment, their role in decision making is very meager, especially in the rural areas. So, there have been cases whereby the women knew the fact that the LPG cylinder is relatively easy to use, is relatively more beneficial to the health. Despite this fact, because they have insufficient role in the decision making of the family, there is a very low refill ratio. Then comes the poor targeting of the subsidies. The survey mentions that around 13% of the households did not receive the subsidy for their last LPG refill. 23% did not even know that they had received it or not. So, again, the poor targeting of subsidies is an issue. And the last is that dependence on the import of the LPG has steadily increased to over 64%. Now, if the dependence on imported LPG is increasing, that means the government is spending more money in importing the LPG. So, if the government is spending more money in importing the LPG, then how can it give the subsidy to the people? Because there is a financial crunch. So these are various challenges associated with the scheme, that why people are not refilling despite increase in the number of connections. The author in this article therefore says that we should not go for the one size fits all approach. And therefore, because our objective is the clean cooking, so LPG is one of the tools to achieve it, but there are other tools also. For example, there can be a shift towards e-cooking, for example, using electricity like inductions. So, in urban areas, around 10% of the population is using this e cooking mode, and this can be replicated in the rural areas also. But again, then the challenge will be of electricity. And that is why it says that we have to identify certain regions where the LPG should be more used, and other regions whereby we are able to transmit electricity. In those areas, we can also go for e cooking. So, these were the ideas mentioned in today's article in relation to the clean cooking strategy. This topic has appeared at page number 10, and the topic reads: at 8.2%, India's core sector growth touches the 5-month high in June. So, as it is very clear from the headline, that this basically article is talking about the India's core industry, that is the core sectors. However, when it comes to the UPSC's examination, these small term data are not very relevant. What is relevant is the certain core or the factual information related to the India's core sector. That is why this topic we are covering from the prelims perspective, and that too from the economic section. So in this session, we are going to learn about the index of industrial production on the which it is measured, 8 core industries, their relative weightage, etc. So first of all, what do we mean by index of industrial production, that is IIP? It basically is the index to measure the production across various industries, and hence it measures the quantum of changes in the industrial production in an economy. Now, let us say that if it is measuring that there has been this 8.2% rise or fall, so that means there has to be some base year also. So, what is the base year for IIP? The base year is 2011 and 12. So, making this as a reference, all the data are given. It is compiled and published every month by the National Statistical Office, NSO, important, under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So, which are those core sectors or the core industries in India? In total, there are 8 core industries: coal, crude oil, natural gas, petroleum, refinery products, fertilizer, steel, cement, and electricity. Why these sectors are known as the core sectors? Because they are actually the foundation of any economic activity that is going on in India. For example, let's say we take the fertilizers into account. Now let us imagine that if the government comes across a data that fertilizer consumption is increasing, So it can deduce from it that the agriculture is also performing well. That is why the fertilizers consumption is increasing, right? Similarly, if the coal consumption or production is increasing, it means that industries are increasing. So basically, in order to tackle the problem that government cannot go to each and every industry or entity to measure how it is performing, it took 8 basic sectors, that is the core sectors, which can tell the average pattern or the trend of the Indian economy. These 8 core industries constitute around 40.2% of the total IIP. That means IIP is not restricted only to the core sectors, it covers many industries. However, 8 core industries are a part of it, having 40.27% of share, right? Now this index, that is the index of core industries, is prepared by Office of Economic Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Now again see, here we were talking about index of industrial production, here we are talking about index of 8 core industries. So there are different organizations which are publishing it, right? The base year remains the same. When it comes to weightage of different sectors in this index, we see that refinery products, which commands 28.04% in the total weight, is the highest. So that means refinery products is the first one. Then comes the electricity. And the least weightage is carried by fertilizers, right? So this factual information very important for prelims examination. So these were the certain facts which were important in this news article. This topic has appeared again at the text and the context page. It reads, Akira ransomware. Why has the government issued a warning against it? This is the very immediate context of this news article. Recently, India's Computer Emergency Response Team, which is also known as CERT-IN, has issued an alert for a ransomware called Akira. Now it was found that this particular ransomware attacked the Windows as well as the Linux devices. It steals and encrypts the data, forcing the victims to pay double the ransom for decryption and recovery. In this context, again, this topic is relevant from the prelims perspective, and that too in the science and tech section. So that is why here we will be discussing certain key facts related to this thing. First is, what do we understand by a ransomware? This word is being made out of two words. One is the ransom and other is the ware, which is basically the malware. So what happens is that it is a type of a malicious software or a malware which is designed to block the access to a computer system. So basically what will happen, that hacker will hack your important files in your computers, and in order to give your data back, your files back, or to decrypt those files again, he will ask for some money, right? That is why it is a type of malicious software designed to block the access to computer system or data until a ransom is paid to the attacker. It can attack the individuals, businesses, or even the government organizations. So this is a ransomware. Now what is Akira ransomware? It is basically a type of ransomware which encrypts the data, creates a ransomware note, and delete all the window shadow volume copies, basically a type of backups. So there can be certain areas in your devices where you can have stored a copy of that data over there. So those copies are also affected. And why it is known as Akira? Because when the file names are modified, it has an Akira extension within the encryption. So it is basically designed to close the processes or shut down the Windows services that may keep it from encrypting the files on the affected system. And it uses a VPN service, that is virtual private network service, especially when the users have not enabled a two-factor authentication. So basically, Akira is a type of ransomware. The name derives from the extension of Akira. It encrypts the data. In order to decrypt the data, this ransom is asked. That is why in this relation, certain has come up with certain measures which can be taken against this Akira ransomware or for in general any ransomware. One is maintaining up-to-date offline backups of critical data. So if your data is very important, very critical, then you should have the offline backup of that data, which can be done in the form of the external devices. Second is updating all the operating systems and networks on regular basis. Third, strong password policies and multi-factor authentication must be enforced. Last, periodic security audits of the critical network system, especially the database servers, must be done, and this is particularly true when it comes to the government's critical data. So these are certain key facts from the prelims perspective important from this article.